Good morning and welcome to the Killik & Co market update. It's been a very negative week for the FTSE 100. In fact, it's shaping up to be the worst week since 2016, and we've also had the worst single day of trading that we've seen over the last 4 years. That said, the index still remains above the 7,000 level, and that is considered to be quite an important psychological level for investors. So what's the reason for the fall in the index over the last week? Well, one of the reasons is, of course, Brexit. We're now just weeks away from the deadline, and we still have very little clarity over what exactly is going to happen. Another reason for the fall is some negative data about the UK services sector that was released this week. Some data came out to show that the UK services sector contracted over the last month, and bearing in mind that over 80% of UK output comes from the services sector, this contraction is very bad news indeed. I think it's also important to bear in mind that the FTSE 100 is driven by sentiment. The FTSE 100 is in fact a very international index. It contains companies such as BP, Shell, HSBC, and although those companies are listed on the UK Stock Exchange, a very small percentage of their revenue actually comes from the UK. And in fact, looking at the FTSE 100 overall, less than 50% of the revenue of the companies within the index actually come from the UK. So you could say actually the FTSE 100 is not a particularly good indicator of the UK's fortunes, but nevertheless it is impacted by sentiment towards the UK, and the fact that it's fallen this week does illustrate that sentiment towards the UK economy is declining. Now, for quite some time now, we have been concerned that the US will impose tariffs on Europe, and this week we did appear to move a step closer to this. Over the last 15 years, there has been a dispute running between the EU and the US over state subsidies that have been given to Boeing and Airbus. The EU believes that over $23 billion worth of illegal state aid have been given to Boeing. The US believes that $22 billion worth of illegal state aid have been given to Airbus. So over the last 10 years, the World Trade Organization has been taking a look at this case. And this week it announced its ruling on the case against Airbus. It did agree that illegal state aid has been given, and it has given the US permission to impose tariffs on over $7.5 billion worth of EU exports. And this week the US has announced it would like to impose tariffs on goods including French wine, Italian cheese, and cashmere sweaters. The World Trade Organization is not expected to rule on the case against Boeing until next year. Now, investors had hoped that because clearly illegal state aid has been given on both sides, they had hoped the two sides could come to some kind of settlement. But as yet, the US still seems keen to push ahead with tariffs in the meantime. So I don't think this will be good for market sentiment over the next few months. And finally this week, we've seen that the company WeWork has been forced to cancel its IPO after a lack of interest from investors. And this is despite the fact that the company hoped to receive a valuation of over $47 billion. Now, clearly there were some company-specific issues here. For example, there were some concerns about the capability of the company's chief executive. But more broadly, I think this does make the point that investors are becoming quite tired and quite concerned about the number of companies listing that are yet to make a profit. If we look at 2019 so far, there have been quite a large number of IPOs, and of these, only 24% are expected to make a positive net profit in the current year. The remaining 76% of these new companies IPOing are making a loss. And I think investors are becoming a bit concerned about that. And given the volatility we've seen in the market of late, I think investors are stating a preference for investing in companies that are a bit more stable with a longer term track record. So that's something that we have seen over the last week. Now, looking ahead to next week, we have got results coming out from Delta Airlines, and also we're waiting the decision from the EU regarding the new deal that Boris Johnson has put forward. That's it from us for this week. Have a nice weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.